some room.
Unjust and unreasonable refusal to deal with respect to vessel space accommodations. Did the rulemaking get released yet? Well, no. But I have some updates. What's the FMC up to? Hi, welcome to By Land and By Sea, an attorney breaking down the week in supply chain, presented by the Maritime Professor, me. I'm Lauren Beagen, founder of the Maritime Professor and Squall Strategies, and I'm your favorite maritime attorney. Join me every week as we walk through both ocean transport and surface transport topics in the wild world of supply chain. As always, the guidance here is general and for educational purposes only. It should not be construed to be legal advice, and there is no attorney-client privilege created by this video. If you need an attorney, contact an attorney. So before we get into the discussion of the day, let's go through my top 3 stories of the week. So story number 1, there was an American Shipper article by John Gallagher out this week, and he was recounting a webinar that FMC Commissioner Carl Bentzel and World Shipping Council John Butler participated in. Interesting panel. But in the webinar, Commissioner Bentzel discusses the strain that the FMC staff is experiencing, and I'll add, has been experiencing for years, even before the supply chain came into focus. Look, haven't I been saying this? The Federal Maritime Commission is woefully underfunded and understaffed, even without the additional regulatory authorities. You won't necessarily hear them complain about it because they're busy getting to work. But an annual budget of just over $32 million is a line item in most other agencies. $32 million. And a staff of just over 120 full-time employees, it's a department elsewhere. They give out more than $32 million in grants and funding into other agencies. And that's what the FMC as a whole, as an entire agency, has to work with. That's what the FMC is working with. FMC is tasked with regulating all ocean freight hitting our shores and is given the support akin to a federal project, maybe even smaller than a federal project. All ocean freight, if you're not familiar with the scope, is 90% of everything you use, consume, wear. 90% of everything moves by ocean transit. Also, the article says that the first rulemaking up is actually detention and demurrage, but that's not correct. The first rulemaking up is unreasonable refusal to deal or negotiate with respect to vessel space accommodations. It was due 30 days from June 16th. We'll talk about that. I previously thought that it was 10 days overdue. We're going to talk about that. But this is the first one. There was a 30-day, there was a 45-day, and there was a 60-day for initiating the rulemaking. This one was the 30-day, and it was the unreasonable refusal to deal or negotiate with respect to vessel space accommodations. All right, story number 2. The commission meeting was held on Wednesday this week. That's where we got a little bit more clarity. They had some technical difficulties. I hope that you were able to stick with them if you were trying to sign on at 10 a.m. and there was no audio. But they were able to resume the public open session of the meeting at noon. If you missed it, I'll link to the recording. So what actually happened was they switched over to Teams. They had previously had it on their YouTube channel, but then they switched over to Teams for the noon and did it entirely virtual. They still kept their closed session, but that was always closed. That was never open to the public. So the open agenda was what they moved over to noon. And it was a staff briefing on OSRA 22, Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 22. But on the closed agenda was a staff briefing on unreasonable refusal to deal or negotiate with respect to vessel space and a closed meeting on enforcement process and pending matters. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes, but story number 3, it's still on here. By Land and By Sea is now a podcast. So look for it wherever you get your podcast. Add this one to your rotation, subscribe to it. You'll get notified every Friday afternoon after we do the live show here when it gets uploaded to the podcast platform. I reference my old shows quite a bit. You can go download the old shows and get up to speed on pretty much all the big topics that are out there and that are happening and continue to happen in the wild world of global supply chain. So with that, let's get into the meat and potatoes of the day. So I thought with the commission meeting this week, we would actually see a rulemaking released immediately after. It looks like the reading of Congress requiring a rulemaking within 30 days. was a little different than my reading. So here's why. Here's what happened. So what I thought the meeting, when I saw that the meeting was in closed session and the agenda item was unreasonable refusal to deal or negotiate with respect to vessel space. Remember, the commission meeting happened this past Wednesday. This was the first of 3 rulemakings that FMC was directed to do under the Ocean Shipping Reform Act. I thought that it signaled that the rule language was probably ready and they were going to do a vote in closed session and the text would be released. Chairman Maffei addressed this, not directly, but kind of. So what Chairman Maffei said when discussing that the unreasonable refusal to deal or negotiate with respect to vessel space accommodations required the FMC to initiate a rulemaking. So he said initiate, and as soon as he said initiate, maybe it was the way that he said it. Okay, so that's it. That's where we vary on our interpretation. So let's go to the law. What did OSRA say? Rulemaking on unreasonable refusal to deal or negotiate with respect to vessel space accommodations, not later than 30 days after the date of enactment of this act, so that was June 16th, the Federal Maritime Commission, in consultation with the Commandant of the United States Coast Guard, shall initiate a rulemaking defining unreasonable refusal to deal or negotiate with respect to vessel space. I saw that, I read that, and I said, okay, 30 days, they're going to publish it. No, initiate. He said initiate, it says initiate. That's what it is. They just have to start the rulemaking. So here I've been expecting that the rule would come out right away, mostly because of the 30 days being explicitly outlined. When it says 30 days, I thought, okay, 30 days, here we go. I thought there would be a little bit of a slip on that date. But look, they have to finish the whole thing, the whole rule in 6 months. The rest of the law, the Federal Maritime Commission shall issue a final rule not later than 6 months after the date of enactment of this act, so June 16th. So that's December 16th. The entire rule has to be finished up. Chairman Maffei did say that the rule is expected to be released very quickly, the rulemaking first stage. I actually almost expected that it would be released this week still, even though, the meeting happened on Wednesday. I thought they were just probably finishing up and it would be released anytime after that. The way that he was saying that he expected the rule to be released, it almost felt like, okay, maybe I'll still be able to cover this and we'll still get some clarity this week. I'm almost thinking next week. I don't know. It's so hard to make these determinations. But Chairman Maffei mentioned that they needed the closed session to deliberate on the text and the policy decisions of this notice of proposed rulemaking. So I'll stop there again. Notice of proposed rulemaking. He said that it was a notice of proposed rulemaking. So remember, we were talking about the different types of rulemaking that could be released. And in recent rulemakings, we've seen the advance notice of proposed rulemaking, the ANPRM. So that was with the detention and demurrage billing information rulemaking. We saw that last spring. That was April 2022. And now we're expecting that next step, which would be the notice of proposed rulemaking. So Chairman Maffei said that he expects the notice of proposed rulemaking to be released quickly. So ANPRM, the advance notice of proposed rulemaking, is what we saw with the D&D billing information last spring. Remember, this is the early stage. This is a question is being asked. This is, we have some ideas, but we would really like to get a pulse from the industry. Notice of proposed rulemaking is the other one, is the next stage, the notice of proposed rulemaking. Usually that means that there's some text drafted. There's usually some text maybe initially decided. They have some idea of where they want to go. And that's what Chairman Maffei is now saying, that the NPRM, the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, is what they intend to release on this unreasonable refusal to deal with respect to vessel space accommodations. That tells us something right there. That tells us that they have some ideas of where they'd like to go with all of this. Like I said, the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022 directed the FMC to initiate 3 different rulemakings. We covered this in more detail a few weeks ago. Go check out my podcast By Land and by Sea for more episodes on demand. But here's a little refresher. So basically, the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022 was passed by the Senate. There was originally a House version and a Senate version. It was passed by the Senate. The Senate version won out between the two, and then that Senate version was sent over to the House because they have to be the same, and if they're not the same, they go to conference so that they match up before they can go to the president for signing. Here, we had the Senate version, we had the House version. Senate version won out. They sent the Senate version over to the House, and the House voted on it. So then we had two bills exactly the same, comboed together, approved through both chambers, went up to President Biden, and it was signed, Ocean Shipping Reform Act 2022, on June 16th, and that's when it became a law. So that's what was happening. So there were three rulemakings. One, the unreasonable refusal to deal and negotiate with respect to vessel space accommodations. This is what we're talking about. That was 30 days. Remember, 30 days to initiate. I still think these dates are going to be pretty close. I think the ones that maybe have a full year to do the full rulemaking, maybe we'll see those slide a little bit more. But 30 days from June 16th, the FMC needed to initiate. So that was mid-July. I think we're going to see early August. Detention and demurrage prohibited practices. 45 days from June 16th, they needed to initiate. So I had originally thought that would probably be early August. Maybe we'll see. I mean, now who knows, right? It could be mid-August. It could be end August. We'll see. There was some talk that there might be the detention and demurrage, the ANPRM, the Advance Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, has still been worked on. That was the next stage, the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, incorporating all the comments that were filed at that first stage in April. Those might be incorporated into this prohibited practices. Who knows? It's D&D. Maybe they're just going to loop all D&D rulemakings together. But they were mentioning in this commission meeting that they were going to be probably releasing that next stage, the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, sometime this fall. So maybe they'll get keyed together. Maybe we're going to have a D&D prohibited practices tagged on to the D&D billing invoice information, minimum billing invoice information, which would be supplemental to the prescriptive invoice information. Remember, it was very specific on what you now need to include in the invoice on detention demurrage billing invoices, as stated in OSRA. We'll talk about that in a minute. So we might see all D&D. It might be a D&D filled September or October. I'm interested. I'm so interested to see how these rulemakings keep continuing to move forward with all the comments incorporated, and then with some of the new prescriptive directives from Congress. And then the third rulemaking was unfair, unjust, discriminatory methods. So that was 60 days from June 16th. Originally, I had thought that would probably be early September. Now, who knows? I think that's probably still, I think there's still going to be pressure to get these done quickly. I think they're still going to move fast. I think that's probably going to be maybe September, October. They probably have a lot done on the D&D prohibited practices and D&D billing. So unfair, unjust, discriminatory methods, that's going to be a beast of a rule. But I think they probably have some idea, certainly from the past 2 years, but then case law that's gone back beyond that. They have some ideas on what they think is unfair and unjust discriminatory methods. And I think that they're going to start to create some structural guidelines around that. Excuse me. So the first rule, the one that I had expected to come out, the rulemaking on unreasonable refusal to deal or negotiate with respect to vessel space accommodations, not later than 30 days after the date of enactment, the FMC, in consultation with the Commandant of the U.S. Coast Guard, shall initiate a rulemaking. So this rulemaking, it says, shall initiate a rulemaking defining unreasonable refusal to deal or negotiate with respect to vessel space under Section 41104A10 of Title 46. So that's 46 U.S.C. 41104A10. So what does that section say? So let's start to dive into what they are going to be fixing up here. So what does that section say? So 46 U.S.C. 41104 generally deals with common carriers. So what does the law say? 41104A, in general, a common carrier, either alone or in conjunction with any other person, directly or indirectly, shall not, when we hop down to subsection 10, unreasonably refuse to deal or negotiate, including with respect to vessel space accommodations provided by an ocean common carrier. So that's it. That's it. There isn't a lot of information relating to this. I mean, that's not uncommon. This is the statute. So the statute is given from Congress as the law. And then the agency, if there needs to be some translation of it, some interpretation, that's where the agency will create a regulation. And so that's the difference. Like I said, I've said this before, I've explained this before. You can graduate law school now. You have a statute from Congress, and you have a regulation from the agency. The statute comes from Congress. They say, in general, for the most part, they like to, it's a more of a broad brush. With OSRA, we saw a little bit more prescriptive, a little bit more detail oriented. Typically, Congress, I like to see Congress have a broader brush of intention, and then the agency interprets the intention of Congress with their industry expertise. And like I said, this is what I like to see. I like to see that the agency then brings in their expertise of the industry, because arguably Congress doesn't have the same level of expertise as the agency. The agency brings in their expertise and turns that into a regulation. So that's what Congress is saying here. We have this statute. We'd like you to dive in further. Unreasonably refuse to deal or negotiate, including with respect to vessel space accommodations. This is what a common carrier, either alone or in conjunction with any other person, shall not do. But what does that mean? And that's what Congress wants the FMC. So in consultation with the Commandant is also required here. I'm interested to see how this plays out, right? In consultation with the Commandant of the Coast Guard. I mean, vessel space, sure, maybe some safety elements. Do you have thoughts on this? Do you have thoughts on why Congress was directing the FMC in consultation with the Commandant of the Coast Guard? I'm interested to see. I mean, obviously, vessel space and safety of vessels, and this will just be an interesting piece to bring into it. So the commission, in the commission meeting this week, said that they started the rulemaking the day the law was signed, and is actually on track to complete the rulemaking by December. I'm encouraged by that. They announced that they expect a notice of proposed rulemaking, the NPRM, seeking public comment to be published in the immediate future. So what does that mean? We've talked about the ANPRM versus the NPRM, the advance notice of proposed rulemaking versus the notice of proposed rulemaking. The notice being that they're going to have some text and some language and some probable policy proposals on what they think this should say. So what does that mean for everybody out there? Get those thoughts together. I've said this before. Get your thoughts together. Have you experienced a moment that seemed like it was an unreasonable refusal to deal with respect to vessel space? If so, get those thoughts together. You could collect them as generalizations. You could collect them and file them through one of your associations. So you can maybe kind of hide under the cover of the association, so to speak, or you could file them directly through your company stating what happened. This would not be filing of a complaint moment. This is not filing of a complaint. This would be filing comments for an open rulemaking. Filing a complaint is a different mechanism. We've covered that before. But this would be a moment to help affect the change of the regulation before it's finalized. This would likely be one of those last moments. So you have the NPRM, the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, and then you probably are going to have a final rule after that. They're going to incorporate all the comments. And then once they go to the final rule, they're going to, as long as there aren't significantly adverse comments, or even if they are, maybe they'll make a few amendments to the rule as proposed in this first notice of proposed rulemaking. So this is your moment. If you really have strong opinions on what you think this should look like, get those thoughts together, because this 30-day open comment period, I bet it's going to be a 30-day open comment period. If they're going to be ready and prepared to have the full rule closed up by December, get your thoughts together, file them. I expect it to come out in a week or two. I mean, the language said that they were very quickly turning this around. Get those thoughts together. Work with your associations. Bring some of that information over to the association if you think that that's going to be the best mechanism for relaying your specific experiences, or file them file them yourself. But now is the time. I can't stress that enough. Now is the time. Again, this is not legal advice. This is all for educational purposes. But now is the time to bring those thoughts together. Commissioner Maffei actually released an important statement post-commission meeting, and it's worth repeating here. So he said, rarely does Congress give an agency a specific to-do list, but here Congress provided us with explicit tasks with timelines intended to help some of the nation's supply chain challenges. These are important initiatives that will make a difference to people who depend on the movement of ocean cargo. This is the law of the land. Our job is to implement it, and we are all well along the way in doing so. Parties who are not compliant are inviting the scrutiny of the Commission and exposing themselves to the consequences for not following the law or acting in a manner inconsistent with the clear direction of Congress. Look, he's making sure everybody knows you must be compliant with all sections of OSRA, including the self-executing parts. We've covered that previously, notably the self-executing, the parts that were immediately active, that were immediately the law of the land, the detention and demurrage invoice requirements. So what else happened during the commission meeting? I'm glad you asked. They took inventory of everything they've done recently in terms of public announcement, specifically highlighting the industry advisory. We covered that in a previous episode. But the FMC reiterated in this commission meeting, the FMC reiterated that there is no phase-in period for invoice requirements for detention and demurrage. They stated that in the industry advisory, and then they repeated it here, harkening back to that industry advisory, saying it's not confusing. It is required upon signing. June 16th made all of those pieces of an invoice that OSRA 22 lays out that we've covered previously. All of those are now required on all invoices as of June 16th. They also noted that they've heard of some instances, the FMC has noted that they've heard of some instances of shippers having to sign guarantees for future detention and demurrage payments prior to releasing cargo. Apparently what's happening is there's some delaying of detention and demurrage billing with no indication of when the delay would stop or when the invoice would be due, and they're requiring shippers to pay guarantees for future D&D payments prior to releasing that cargo. The FMC made mention of this and said, look, we're watching all of this. To me, that says the FMC saying, we don't like it. Don't get funny now. These are the rules. You need to follow them. Look, Chairman Maffei did mention that detention and demurrage is essential to keeping cargo moving. It is. It needs to be a part of the process. But you can't be manipulative with it. It needs to be part of the movement of the cargo. And part of the movement of the cargo is also the transparency and the clarity over what is due, what charges did accumulate under a detention or demurrage rule. And that's what the prescriptive language of the billing invoice information says in OSRA 2022. Commissioner Dye, though, did caution not to paint a broad brush on anyone. And I appreciate that because it says that she's being open to being fair and considering all factors without a preconceived bias. We're seeing that obviously a lot against the carriers. Rightfully so, there have been some bad moments and certainly maybe more than a few with the carriers, but that doesn't mean that they're all bad. That doesn't mean that they're bad in all instances. And Commissioner Dye mentioned that she would like to commend a few of the ocean carriers that are actually in compliance with the new detention and demurrage invoice requirements and that were prepared on the date of enactment. Commissioner Dye, speaking of the phase-in and some of the games that were being played, though, said that the two advisories clearly state that there is no phase-in period and that no substitute for phase-in may be made. So she started her remarks saying that she'd like to commend those that were in compliance, but then she also reiterated, look, no phase-in. We gave you two advisories on this, no phase-in. And now you can't substitute your own version of a phase-in. I think she was talking a little bit about some of that delaying of the payment and some of the funny business that's happening. So Chairman Maffei, when Commissioner Dye was done, actually said that he associated himself with Commissioner Dye's comments and that OSRA 22 is the law of the land, and it's our job, their job, the FMC, to implement it. The effective date of the law was immediate upon enactment, immediate upon signing by the president. This became the law of the land. One part that I wanted to highlight specifically was actually toward the end. So Chairman Maffei started to inquire about the accessorial charges, the extra charges that have been seen, bunkering charges, whatever they are. He likened the thought to when you sign up for a cable bill. So he gave the example, I believe it was $99 cable bill you signed up and you end up spending like $180 on it because of all these extra charges. He actually brought that as an example and I thought it was a good one. Chairman Maffei asked the FMC General Counsel Steve Anderson what he thought of it, and if the charges that are talked about specifically in the charge complaints that OSRA gave to the FMC, if those could include these extra charges. Remember, this was just part of the meeting generally, but General Counsel Anderson said, yes, he thinks that OSRA was written that he thinks that OSRA, as it was written, gives the FMC a chance to broaden that policy of charges to include potentially the extra charges that are being seen in the industry. This section on charge complaints in OSRA, in the language, is any charges that are not compliant. So it's not actually defined to say specifically detention and demurrage. Look, so as if the FMC needed more to do, it looks like they might be trying to decide whether to open up the gates to tackle bogus extra charges. You know these charges. They might be environmental charge with no mention of where it goes or how it aids the environment. No dig on an environmental charge, but if it's not associated with anything and there's no rationale, I mean, it might be a rainy day charge, it might be the Tuesday charge. You can't have some of these random charges. They need to be somehow rationalized. They need to have some sort of rationalization. As a general statement, if you are charging an extra charge, or if you are on the receiving end of one of these extra charges, make sure there's a rationale for that charge. If not, start looking at the options. Look, watch the FMC here. They may come out and say that they are fine to file with the charge complaints. We're not sure. They're not quite going that far yet, but they expect to, Chairman Maffei said that he was going to talk to the other commissioners and see if this might be something that the FMC might have an appetite to expand and make clear that they're expanding. Because right now, charge complaints, it seemed the intention was detention and demurrage. Maybe not. Maybe you can file complaints for other charges. And also, really interestingly, the FMC has only received seven charge complaints so far. Granted, they just released their interim guidance on how to file charge complaints, but only 4 of those. 7 have been filed, and only 4 of those actually qualified under the post-June 16th charge date. Remember, we talked about this in a prior episode, but in general, charge complaints, if you file a charge complaint, which I encourage you to do if that's the right mechanism for you. This is not legal advice, general educational information. But if you do submit a charge complaint, it needs to be on an invoice or a charge that was post June 16th. That was kind of a funny little section, but it wasn't post dated. It was from June 16th and forward. So if there's a charge that you have a charge complaint for, it needs to be June 16th, the date of enactment of OSRA 22, or forwards or more recently. So basically the past 6 weeks or so. This is your chance. Get your info together and use these services. Again, not legal advice, just general information, but these services are here for your benefit. Use them. The FMC is getting engaged. They've been engaged. They're finding more ways to become more accessible to the public and to those who feel wronged by the supply chain generally. They want to help remedy that. Where they can make guardrails, where they can make changes, where they can update the system. That's what they want to do, and that's the purpose of these rulemakings. So that's it. No rulemaking yet, but stay tuned. We will be watching. As always, the guidance here is general and for educational purposes. It should not be construed to be legal advice directly related to your matter. If you need an attorney, contact an attorney. But if you do have specific legal questions, feel free to reach out to me at my legal company, Squall Strategies. Otherwise, for non-legal questions, e-learning, and general industry information and insights, come find me at the Maritime Professor. If you like these videos, let me know. Comment, like, and share. If you missed any previous videos or any of these episodes, they live on my YouTube page, but they also live on my podcast, By Land and by Sea, presented by the Maritime Professor. Go ahead and check them out. Like, subscribe, and while you're at it, go check out our website, themaritimeprofessor.com. E-learning content is still being created, and I expect a release date hopefully soon. So until next week, this is Lauren Beagen, the Maritime Professor, and you've just listened to By Land and by Sea. See you next time.